entertaining with HD faces. Simple, high-definition group video conferencing that will change the way you work. And perhaps a whole lot more. Visit GoToMeeting.com and sign up for your free 30-day trial.
An airline has planes and people. And the planes can seem the same, so it comes down to the people. Because bad weather, the price of oil, those are every airline's reality. And solutions won't come from 500 tons of metal and a paint job. They'll come from people. Delta people, who made us the biggest airline in the world and then decided that that wasn't enough.
Nature is spectacular, and we want to keep it that way. That's why CSX trains move 1 ton of freight nearly 500 miles on a single gallon of fuel. Spectacular.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
In short, the American economy is in trouble. The most resourceful, industrialized country on earth ranks among the last in the rate of economic growth.
It is a crisis of confidence. It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will.
I regret to say that we're in the worst economic mess since the Great Depression.
I challenge the new Congress to work with me to enact the Middle-Class Bill of Rights without adding to the deficit.
We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis, and the federal government is responding with decisive action.
Our economy is badly weakened, a consequence of greed and irresponsibility on the part of some, but also our collective failure to make hard choices and prepare the nation for a new age.
No matter how much things change, they stay the same. You are looking right now at a live shot inside Spalding Auditorium. The 8 Republican presidential candidates all vying for their party's nomination, just about to take their seats and begin this Bloomberg Washington Post presidential debate. And, you know, Tom, we were just looking at that string of sound bites of the presidents throughout the years talking about the crises they've dealt with. But what is so unique about this time, this slump, is the duration. How long?
Let's bring in Matt Dowd to talk about this. A chronic sense, the length of this crisis. We're into the 5th year from August of 2007. This is getting old not only for us, it's getting old for these politicians, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that there's such a demand for leadership at this point in time. This is actually even extended even further than that. To me, that if you look back in the history of this thing, we are in much fundamental change and as much concern as we were 70, 80 years ago in the Great Depression and going into World War II when we became a player on the global stage, and 70, 80 years before that when we moved from an agricultural-based society to an industrial-based. We are, I think, at one of those points, which is why it's so wrenching for the American public and why they're looking for leadership.
One quick question, if we can. When you look at the struggle tonight that they're in, are you focused on jobs, or is there something else you're focused on?
I'm focused on a much broader thing, is who is the leader that can instill confidence and bring some energy to this economy. I think that we hear a lot of policy specifics, but I think the public wants that, and we need to hear more of that. But what they really want to see is who can restore confidence in our economy.
Margaret?
All right, and we're going to be talking about that throughout the next few hours. But, Tom, I want to turn now to our partnership with social networking site LinkedIn. They've got 120 million professionals, and we're working with them to really get a pulse on the economy. One question that we're posting: what will drive companies to boost hiring? You can go to LinkedIn.com to answer that question and a few others about politics and the economy now. Meantime, stay with us. The debate, we are just moments away from the beginning of this debate. It is must-watch television on the #1 issue for Americans right now, the economy.
this fast-paced, digital everything life, there's nothing like experiencing the world's finest journalism in its original form. So subscribe today and save 50% on home delivery of the New York Times. Whether it's a full 7 days of everything the Times has to offer, or the Weekender, a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday subscription, choose what works for you. And so you don't have to unplug completely. Enjoy unlimited access to our website on any device, plus our apps for your tablet and smartphone at no extra charge. So sign up today for as little as $5.20 a week to receive the greatest newspaper in the world and all the incredible experiences that come with it. To save 50%, call 1-800-897-1921 or go to nytimes.com/save and order now.
During the course of this debate, you'll be hearing a lot from me and my friends about the national debt. After all, we're the ones who will be picking up the tab. Let's start with the basics. The federal government's debt today is over $14 trillion. That's trillion with a capital T. But on our current path, our debt is projected to double, triple, and even quadruple by the time I'm all grown up. That's based on Congressional Budget Office estimates. That means when I'm in my 30s, my share of the national debt will be about $125,000. Where am I going to get that kind of money? And who do we borrow all of this money from? Well, in 1970, only 5% of our public debt was owed to foreign countries. But today, it's nearly 50%. Don't you see how that could be a problem? It's time for you adults to put a long-term fiscal plan in place so us kids have a shot at a decent future.
There are many ways to start the day, but for those of us who need to stay on top of business, only one gets to the point.
It's 6 o'clock here in New York City.
We've got a jam-packed morning for you.
We'll be tracking the story from Asia to the Middle East.
Markets are rallying.
This is another Bloomberg exclusive.
We're going to head to our markets desk.
I'm so glad you could be here.
Everybody's watching these guys.
Now you're awake. Bloomberg Mornings.
Let's go down to find out exactly what this means to business today.
Hey, can you give me a lift to a couple auto parts stores?
Why waste your time and gas when all you have to do is go to rockauto.com? See thousands of parts, even for your old car. Super fast shipping and amazing low prices.
Wow.
At rockauto.com, you'll find the pictures, specifications, and application details you need to choose the right parts at great prices. Delivered to your home or business. Rock Auto, all the parts your car will ever need.
All the parts your car will ever need. Rock Auto.
Welcome back. We are speaking to you live from Dartmouth College, site of the Republican candidates' presidential debate, just about to begin a few moments from now. The candidates are all taking the stage. And in Washington, we have a special team lined up, fierce fact-checking, a 40-person reality check team in the Bloomberg Washington Bureau. They're going to spend the next few hours listening carefully, giving us a heads up if a candidate stretches the truth. That never happens in debates, Tom. But we're going to have the results. They're going to stream live on Bloomberg.com. We're also going to bring them to you during our post-debate show. Tom and I will be here. Matt will join us as well. And Tom, what we're really hoping to do is push the candidates beyond rhetoric and really try to nail them down to their plans
on
to grow
the economy. I like what Al Hunt and Charlie Rose have talked about with us. Matthew Dodd, any final thoughts here before we begin the debate?
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how this format where they're sitting around a table and not standing behind a podium, how much that forces a deeper conversation about the economy. I'm also looking for their style, stylistically. How do they do? And will any of the dark horse candidates try to break out? Will Michelle Bachmann try to break out? Will Rick Perry show up and perform like they needed to? Will Herman Cain, who's finally under the spotlight, do well under the spotlight for the first time at a debate? That's what I'm looking for to see how that happens.
It's the most interesting when you look at the development up here. How important is Chris Christie in the room for Mitt Romney?
Well, I think it gets a huge boost going into the rooms. You need confidence going into these debates. You want a lot of confidence going into this. You want energy, and I think he provides that energy for
Matthew Dowd, thank you so much. We're just moments away now. We'll be back after the debate is over with some special guests, including two of the candidates. Very exciting night here. Perfect weather in Dartmouth. A lot of excitement in a very Republican Spalding auditorium.
And we will be right back with you after Charlie Rose finishes this debate. Must-watch television. Stay with Bloomberg TV.
Live from Spalding Auditorium on the campus of Dartmouth College, the Bloomberg Washington Post Republican presidential debate.
I'm Charlie Rose. Welcome to Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. This great college, established in 1769, in a state that often plays a crucial role in picking presidents. Tonight, it is the site of an important Republican presidential debate brought to you by Bloomberg, the Washington Post, and WBIN television. This is a time of anxiety about our country and our children's future in a continuing economic crisis. Many are in despair, not only about policy, but politics. And so we ask who has the character, who has the ideas, and who has the experience to lead. This debate is different and distinctive. It is only about the economy. So we debate this evening about spending and taxes, deficit and debt, about the present and the future, about rich and poor, and about the role of government. And because we're at a table, this is the kind of table I like, the kind of kitchen table where families for generations have come together to talk and solve their problems. The rules are 1 minute for an answer, 30 seconds for follow-up and rebuttal. If a candidate is singled out by name for criticism, they have 30 seconds to respond. Later in the debate, they will question each other. I'm the moderator. Joining me are Karen Tumulty of the Washington Post and Juliana Goldman of Bloomberg News. Joining us at the table, the 8 Republican candidates. They are former Governor of Utah, Jon Huntsman, Minnesota Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, Texas Governor Rick Perry, former Godfather Pizza CEO Herman Cain, former U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania Rick Santorum, former Speaker of the House of Representatives Newt Gingrich, Texas Congressman Ron Paul, former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney. I am pleased to be here at this table to have an opportunity to talk to them about the issues that all of us are thinking about. And I began this evening first with Herman Cain. As you know, when Standard & Poor's downgraded American credit, they noted not only the economic difficulties, but the political dysfunction. So we begin this evening with the question, what would you do specifically to end the paralysis in Washington?
2 things. Present a bold plan to grow this economy, which I have put my 999 plan on the table, and it starts with throwing out the current tax code and putting in the 999 plan. Secondly, get serious about bringing down the national debt. The only way we're going to do that is the first year that I'm president and I oversee a fiscal year budget, make sure that revenues equals spending. If we stop adding to the national debt, we can bring it down. So the answer is we must grow this economy with a bold solution, which is why I have proposed 999, and at the same time get serious about not creating annual deficits so we can bring down the national debt. That would reestablish confidence in our system, and I believe we could get our credit rating back.
Governor Perry, are you prepared, even though you've said that you want to make Washington inconsequential, to go to Washington and, as Ronald Reagan did, compromise on spending cuts and taxes in order to produce results?
Well, certainly as the governor of the second largest state, I've had to deal with folks on both sides of the aisle. I've signed 6 balanced budgets as the governor of Texas. So working with folks on both sides of the aisle and bringing ideas, whether it's ways to do your tax structure or what have you. One of the things that I laid out today, I think is a pretty bold plan to put 1.2 million Americans working in the energy industry. And you don't need Congress to do that. You need a president with a plan, which I'm laying out over the next 3 days, and clearly the intent to open up this treasure trove that America is sitting on and getting America independent on the domestic energy side. It's time for another American Declaration of Independence. It's time for energy independence.
We'll come back to energy as also your economic plan this evening, but I go now to Governor Romney. The paralysis is there, and everybody is concerned about it. What specifically would you be prepared to do to make the country moving again on addressing its problems?
I'd be prepared to be a leader. You can't get the country to go in the right direction and get Washington to work if you don't have a president that's a leader. And 3 years ago, we selected a person who'd never had any leadership experience, never worked in the private sector, never had the opportunity to actually bring people together, and he hasn't been able to do so. He said he'd bring us hope and change. Instead, he's divided the nation and tried to blame other people. The real course for America is to have someone who's a leader, who can identify people in both parties who care more about the country than they care about getting reelected. There are Democrats like that. There are Republicans like that. I was the governor of a state that had a few Democrats. People in this room know how many we had in Massachusetts.
So it's essential to deal with Democrats and be prepared to compromise on the big issues of our time?
You have to stand by your principles. At the same time, you know that good Democrats and good Republicans who love the country first will be able to find common ground from time to time and recognize we can't keep on spending like we're spending. We can't demand more from tax revenue from people because that kills jobs and hurts working families. We have got to help the middle class in this country. The only way that'll come together is if you have people on both sides of the aisle who listen to a leader who has the experience of leading, and that's what America's looking for and desperately longing for.
And back to Governor Perry, this plan that you would like to lay out, because Governor Romney has said you've had 2 months to produce a plan, an economic plan. He's had a 59-point plan. What's the plan? What will you say specifically?
Well, clearly opening up a lot of the areas of our domestic energy area. That's the real key. You've got an administration that, by and large, has either by intimidation or overregulation put our energy industry and the rest of the economy in jeopardy. And we've got to have a president who is willing to stand up and to clearly pull back those regulations that are strangling the American entrepreneurship that's out there. And it doesn't make any difference whether it's Obamacare, whether it's Dodd-Frank, or whether it's the tax burden. A president, particularly with the plan that I'm going to be laying out over the next 3 days, and I'm not going to lay it out all for you tonight. You know, Mitt's had 6 years to be working on a plan. I've been in this for about 8 weeks. But clearly, we're going to be focused on, initially, the energy industry in this country and making America, again, independent and clearly the place where domestic energy needs to be produced from.
Let me introduce my friend Karen. Karen.
Congresswoman Bachmann, 3 years after the financial meltdown, Main Street continues to suffer. People have lost their jobs, they've lost their homes, they've lost their faith in the future. But Wall Street is thriving. The banks not only got bailed out by the government, they've made huge profits, they've paid themselves huge bonuses. Do you think it's right that no Wall Street executives have gone to jail for the damage they did to the economy?
Well, I think if you look at the problem with the economic meltdown, you can trace it right back to the federal government, because it was the federal government that demanded that banks and mortgage companies lower platinum-level lending standards to new lows.
But the federal government had also deregulated them.
It was the federal government that pushed the subprime loans. It was the federal government that pushed the Community Reinvestment Act. It was Congressman Barney Frank and also Senator Chris Dodd that continued to push government-directed housing goals. They pushed the banks to meet these rules. And if banks failed to meet those rules, then the federal government said, we won't let you merge. We won't let you grow. There's a real problem. It began with the federal government, and it began with Freddie and Fannie. If you look at these secondary mortgage companies, which the federal government is essentially backing 100%, they put American mortgages in a very difficult place. We had artificially low interest rates. Freddie and Fannie were the center of the universe on the mortgage meltdown, and we had lending standards lowered for the first time in American history. The fault goes back to the federal government, and that's what's wrong with Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank institutionalized all of these problems that were put into effect by the federal government. That's why I introduced the bill to repeal Dodd-Frank. It's the Jobs and Housing Destruction Act.
So, Speaker Gingrich, it sounds like Congresswoman Bachmann does not believe that Wall Street is to blame for the financial mess. You've said that the current protests on Wall Street are, in your words, the natural product of Obama's class warfare. Does this mean that these people who are out there protesting on Wall Street, across the country, have no grievance?
No, let me draw a distinction. I think virtually every American has a reason to be angry. I think virtually every American has a reason to be worried. I think the people who are protesting on Wall Street break into two groups. One is left-wing agitators who would be happy to show up next week on any other topic. And the other is sincere middle-class people who, frankly, are very close to the Tea Party people in actually caring. You can tell which group is which. The people who are decent, responsible citizens pick up after themselves. The people who are just out there as activists trash the place and walk off and are proud of having trashed it. So let's draw that distinction. If they want to really change things, the first person to fire is Bernanke, who is a disaster as chairman of the Federal Reserve. The second person to fire is Geithner. The fact is, in both the Bush and the Obama administrations, the fix has been in. And I think it's perfectly reasonable for people to be angry, but let's be clear who put the fix in. The fix was put in by the federal government. And if you want to put people in jail, I want to second what Michelle said. You ought to start with Barney Frank and Chris Dodd, and let's look at the politicians who created the environment, the politicians who profited from the environment, and the politicians who put this country in trouble.
Clearly you're not saying they should go to jail.
Well, in Chris Dodd's case, go back and look at the countryside deals. So, in Barney Frank's case, go back and look at the lobbyists he was close to at Freddie Mac. All I'm saying is, so if you were everybody in the media who wants to go after the business community ought to start by going after the politicians who have been at the heart of the sickness which is weakening this country, and ought to start with Bernanke, who has still not been exposed for the hundreds of billions of dollars. Let me just say one more thing. I want to repeat this. Bernanke has in secret spent hundreds of billions of dollars bailing out one group and not bailing out another group. I don't see anybody in the news media demanding the kind of transparency at the Fed that you would demand of every other aspect of the federal government. And I think it is corrupt and it is wrong for one man to have that kind of secret power.
So, Congressman Paul, where do you come down on this?
One thing I might say that we have made some inroads on the Federal Reserve. We passed a bill last year. We got a partial, audit of the Fed, and we've learned a whole lot. They were dealing in $15 trillion. $5 trillion went overseas to bail out foreign banks. But you know what? Congress did a lot. I've worked on it for a good many years. But Bloomberg helped and Fox helped. They had court cases, Freedom of Information Act. And there are some, even at this table, who didn't think auditing the Fed was such a good idea, that we could call up the Fed and ask them, and they would tell us what they're doing. I've been calling them up for 30 years, and they never tell me. But we're getting to the bottom of it. But if you want to understand why we have a problem, you have to understand the Fed. Because the cause comes from the business cycle. We shouldn't be asking what to do exactly with the recession. Obviously, we have to deal with that. But you can't you can't cure the disease if you don't know the cause of it. And the cause is the booms. When there are booms, and they're artificial, whether it's the CRA or whether it's the Fed easy credit, when you have bubbles, whether it's the NASDAQ or whether it's the housing bubbles, they burst. And when they do, you have to have corrections, and that's what we're dealing with. And we can do this by building coalitions and not sacrificing any principles.
Juliana?
Thank you, Charlie. Senator Santorum, I want to turn to jobs, because you've said that when you were growing up in a steel town in Pennsylvania, 21% of the country was involved in manufacturing. Now it's down to 9%. Can those jobs ever return? And what would you do to create jobs now?
Yeah, the jobs can come back if you create a climate for them to be profitable. We have a lot of business people, manufacturers in Pennsylvania. I don't know a single one who wanted to ship their jobs offshore, who didn't want them in their own community to be able to employ people and see the fruits of their labor being benefiting the community that they live in. What happened was we became uncompetitive. So we need to be competitive. And that's why I proposed taking the corporate tax for manufacturers and processors, taking it from 35% and eliminating it. 0% tax. Allow this to be the manufacturing capital of the world again. Take that money, $1.2 trillion that's overseas from manufacturers who did send their jobs overseas. Bring it back, 0% tax rate if you invest it in plant and equipment in this country. Repeal every regulation the Obama administration has put in place that's over $100 million. Repeal them all. May have to replace a few. Let's repeal them all because they're all antagonistic to businesses, particularly in the manufacturing sector, and do as Governor Perry suggested. We need a bold energy plan. I put one out there to drill Pennsylvania. I don't want to brag, Governor, but Pennsylvania is the gas capital of the world right now, not Texas, because we are doing a great job, and energy prices and gas went down by 75%.
Let me just follow up, because we are in a crisis. So what would you do right now to create jobs?
The cool thing about my plan, as opposed to Herman's plans and some of the other plans out here, it'll pass tomorrow. It would pass tomorrow. Why? Because industrial state Democrats want those jobs, and they know if we put a pro-manufacturing jobs plan on the table, it will pass overnight. We'll get votes from Indiana and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan, all those states. So it's not just proposing a plan that will get things started that the Wall Street Journal will smile out, the Washington Post, but it's a plan that can actually pass and get things done and bring people together. That's why I put it on the table.
Thank you. I want to follow up now to Governor Huntsman. From the Erie Canal to the internet, innovation is what's always fueled economic recovery. So shouldn't the focus now be on trying to create the innovative jobs of tomorrow? And what do you think those are?
We need to regain our industrial base. I would first and foremost disagree with Rick on one measure. That is, Pennsylvania is not the gas capital of the country. Washington, D.C. is a gas capital of the country. There are two things that critically need to be done for us to stay ahead in this highly competitive world. And when we lose one or both of them, we lose out to the Chinese and the Indians. One is maintaining a strong commitment to innovation, entrepreneurship, and freedom in the marketplace. We have the sense of innovation that no country has been able to replicate. Some have tried, and some will continue to try, but nobody does it like we do here. And that gives rise to high technology, to regular manufacturing jobs across the board. It makes this economy hum when it's working well. The second part of it is you need a marketplace, like Rick described a moment ago, in which you can translate those innovations into products. We are losing our ability to maintain a competitive marketplace today. All right. That's taxes, that's regulation. We've lost it to others. So right now we're not able to translate innovation to the market. We've got to regain the magic of a strong marketplace so that we have the complete package.
Karen.
Congressman Gingrich, Speaker Gingrich, Medicare is going broke. Consider the fact that half of all Medicare spending is done in the last 2 years of life. And research that has been done right here at Dartmouth by the Dartmouth Atlas would suggest that much of this money is going to treatments and interventions that do nothing to prolong life or to improve it. In fact, some of it does the opposite. Do you consider this wasteful spending? And if so, should the government do anything about it?
You know, I'm really glad you asked that. Because I was just swapping emails today with Andy von Eschenbach, who was the head of the National Cancer Institute, the head of the Food and Drug Administration. But before that, he was the provost at MD Anderson, the largest cancer treatment center in the world. And he wrote me to point out that the most recent U.S. government intervention on whether or not to have prostate testing is basically going to kill people. So if you ask me, do I want some Washington bureaucrat to create a class action decision which affects every American's last 2 years of life? Not ever. I think it is a disaster. I think, candidly, Governor Palin got attacked unfairly for describing what would, in effect, be death panels. And what von Eschenbach will tell you, if you call him, is the decision to suggest that we not test men with PSA will mean that a number of people who do not have who are susceptible to a very rapid prostate cancer will die unnecessarily, and there was not a single urologist, not a single specialist on the board that looked at it. So I'm opposed to class intervention for these things.
Well, Congresswoman Bachmann, of course, no one wants the government to come between a doctor and a patient. But do you think that Americans are getting the most for their money in Medicare spending? And how can we make sure that the money that is being spent on the treatments and the preventive treatments that do the most?
We have a big problem today when it comes to Medicare, because we know that 9 years from now, the Medicare Hospital Part B Trust Fund is going to be dead flat broke. So we've got to deal with this issue. I was in the White House with President Obama this summer. We asked him not once but 3 times, President Obama, what is your plan to save Medicare? And the president mumbled, and he didn't give an answer the first time, the second time. And the third time, the president said something very interesting, Karen. He said Obamacare. I think that senior citizens across the country have no idea that President Obama plans for Medicare to collapse, and instead everyone will be pushed into Obamacare. And just like Newt Gingrich said, the way that Obamacare runs, there's a board called IPAB. It's made up of 15 political appointees. These 15 political appointees will make all the major health care decisions for over 300 million Americans. I don't want 15 political appointees to make a health care decision for a beautiful, fragile 85-year-old woman who should be making her own decision.
We'll come back to Medicare as well, and medical issues, and then the cost of Medicare in the United States. I want to talk about advisors and appointees. Tell me, Governor Huntsman, whose advice do you seek on economic issues, and what's the profile of the kind of person you'd like to have advising you in your White House?
I'd like the profile of my own father, who's a great entrepreneur. And he started with nothing, and he built a great business. And my brother now runs that business. People who have been out in the world, who have actually had their hands on products and manufacturing and know something about how to build something from the ground up. That's what this country has always done. It's what we need to continue to do. But in order to have the right policies in place, and some I put forward as governor of the great state of Utah, tax reform. I created a flat tax in the state of Utah. It took that state to the #1 position in terms of job creation. Regulatory reform and energy independence. I want the kind of people who understand what makes an economy work. But let's be real about what it takes to get into federal government service these days. Who on earth from the private sector is ever going to want to give up their privacy and enter government service with the background checks, the financial disclosures, and everything else that serve as tremendous disincentives for good people to get into government? So what we have today, Charlie, we've got a professional governing class of people on one end, and then you've got private sector.
And so what would you do about that, to change that, to attract those kind of people so that they would be willing to serve a cross-section of people from every
Let's get back to
gender.
what we did a generation or two ago when we were more open in terms of accommodating people from all backgrounds who wanted to take a little bit of their life and serve in government and then leave and go back to what it is they did best, whether on the farm or whether insurance or whether business or whether academia.
When you mention a flat tax, does that mean that you look with some favor upon 999 that Herman Cain mentioned at the beginning of this conversation?
I think it's a catchy phrase. In fact, I thought it was the price of a pizza when I first heard about it.
Price of a pizza.
But here's what we need. We need something that's doable, doable, doable. And what I have put forward is a tax program that is doable. It actually wipes clean all of the loopholes and the deductions. This is right out of what the Simpson-Bowles Commission recommended, a bipartisan group of people that took a thoughtful approach to tax reform.
Corporate and individual.
Individual, and on the corporate side, phase out all of the corporate welfare, all of the subsidies, because we can't afford it any longer, in a revenue-neutral fashion, buy down the rate from 35% to 25%. Leveling the playing field for businesses big and small, allowing us to be a whole lot more competitive in the second decade of the 21st century.
Juliana.
Thank you. We will be coming back to 999, but first...
No, wait.
Well,
he mentioned me.
Give him 30 seconds.
He mentioned me, and you didn't give me an opportunity to respond.
You have that opportunity now.
Thank you very much. 999 will pass, and it is not the price of a pizza because it has been well studied and well developed. It starts with, unlike your proposals, throwing out the current tax code. Continuing to pivot off the current tax code is not going to boost this economy. This is why we developed 999. 9% corporate business flat tax, 9% personal income flat tax, and a 9% national sales tax. And it will pass, Senator, because the American people want it to pass.
This is beginning to sound more like my table, Juliana. I mean, Karen.
So, Mr. Cain, who do you turn to for political advice and for economic advice?
My advisors come from the American people. Now, I will have some experts. One of my experts that helped me to develop this is a gentleman by the name of Rich Lowry out of Cleveland, Ohio. He is an economist, and he has worked in the business of wealth creation most of his career. I also have a number of other well-recognized economists that helped me to develop this 999 plan. It didn't come off a pizza box. No, it was well-studied and well-developed because it will replace the corporate income tax, the personal income tax, the capital gains tax, the death tax, and most importantly, the payroll tax.
So who are some of these economists?
Rich Lowry out of Cleveland, Texas, is one of the economists that I have used. He's been my lead economist on helping to develop this.
Juliana.
Thank you. Governor Romney, it's 2013, and the European debt crisis has worsened. Countries are defaulting. Europe's largest banks are on the verge of bankruptcy. Contagion has spread to the U.S., and the global financial system is on the brink. What would you do differently than what President Bush, Henry Paulson, and Ben Bernanke did in 2008?
Well, you're talking about a scenario that's obviously very difficult to imagine, but it's
not a hypothetical because more than half the
I'm afraid it is a hypothetical.
Governor,
you want to explain why it's not a hypothetical?
Yes.
Okay.
Because more than half the country believes that a financial meltdown is likely in the next several years, and the U.S. banks have at least $700 billion in exposure to Europe. So it's a very real threat, and voters want to know what you would do differently.
It's still a hypothetical as to what's going to precisely happen in the future. I'm not very good at being omniscient, but I can tell you this, that I'm not going to have to call up Timothy Geithner and say, how does the economy work? Because I spent my life in the economy. I spent my entire career working in the private sector, starting businesses, helping turn around businesses, sometimes successfully and sometimes not. And I know how to make tough decisions and to gather the input of people from around the country to help make the important decisions that have to be made. Clearly, if you think the entire financial system is going to collapse, you take action to keep that from happening. In the case of Europe right now, they're looking at what's happening with Greece. Are they going to default on their debt? Are they not? That's a decision which I would like to have input on if I were President of the United States and try and prevent the kind of contagion that would affect the U.S. banking system and put us at risk. But I can tell you this, I'm not interested in bailing out individual institutions that have wealthy people that want to make sure that their shares are worth something. I am interested in making sure that we preserve our financial system, our currency, the banks across the entire country, and I will always put the interest of the American people ahead of the interests of any institution.
So would you or would you not be open to another Wall Street bailout?
Well, no one likes the idea of a Wall Street bailout. I certainly don't.
But you said in 2008 that it prevented the collapse of the financial system.
There's no question but that the action that President Bush and that Secretary Paulson took was designed to keep not just a collapse of individual banking institutions, but to keep the entire currency of the country worth something and to keep all the banks from closing and to make sure we didn't all lose our jobs. My experience tells me that we were on the precipice and we could have had a complete meltdown of our entire financial system, wiping out all the savings of the American people. So action had to be taken. Was it perfect? No. Was it well implemented? No, not particularly. Were there some institutions that should not have been bailed out? Absolutely. Should they have used the funds to bail out General Motors and Chrysler? No, that was the wrong source for that funding. But this approach of saying, look, we're going to have to preserve our currency and maintain America and our financial system is essential.
So you agree with Speaker Gingrich about Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Fed?
I wouldn't keep Ben Bernanke in office. I'd choose someone of my own
And who might
interest.
that be?
Well, I haven't chosen that person. I haven't chosen a vice president. I'm not sure I'm the nominee yet.
Well, we'd like to have, nor is anyone else,
yeah, exactly.
But we'd like to have an idea of the kind of people, that you would have confidence in playing this very important role, although Congressman Paul may differ about how important it is.
Well, I wish we could find Milton Friedman again. Although what Milton said to us was, he said, if you took all the economists in America and you laid them end to end, it would be a good thing. And I have more respect for economists than that. The people who help guide my economic policy are Greg Mankiw at Harvard and Glenn Hutchins at Columbia. They were both former chairs of the Council of Economic Advisors. I don't always agree with them. I also talk to a number of business leaders. I talk to people who are currently in the economy, in the financial sector, and in the manufacturing sector. And on the basis of these various viewpoints, I make my decisions. And I believe that drawing on the best minds in this country, including economists, is something that's essential to make sure that we preserve our financial system. Right now, America's in crisis. We don't need to think about a hypothetical of what happens if Europe explodes and pulls us under. Although, if that does happen, You want to have someone who's smart, who has experience, who knows how the financial services sector works, who knows how to protect American jobs, and I do. I've done it.
And as far as you're concerned, there's no institution, no financial institution that's too big to fail.
Well, no, you don't want to bail out anybody. The idea of trying to bail out an institution to protect the shareholders or to protect certain interest group, that's a terrible idea. And that shouldn't happen. You do want to make sure that we don't lose the country, and we don't lose our financial system, and we don't lose American jobs, and that all the banks don't go under. So you have to take action very carefully to make sure that you preserve our currency and preserve our financial system. But bailouts of individual institutions, no one has interest in that, I don't think.
Mr. Kaine, back in 2008, you wrote that the Wall Street bailout was a win-win for the taxpayer. You just heard Governor Romney. Do you agree?
Conceptually, I made that statement based upon the concept, but I happen to agree with Governor Romney. The way it was administered is where it got off track. They were discretionary in which institutions they were going to save rather than apply it equitably, which is what most of us thought was going to be done. The implementation of it is where they got off track. I didn't agree with it. I don't think Governor Romney agreed with it. So did a lot of us. The implementation was at fault.
Housing is considered one of the real problems in terms of our economy and getting housing starts up.
Can I say one thing before we go to housing?
Yes.
Because I think this is really important. There's a real possibility that you can't have the euro and the Greek economy in the same system. There's a possibility we could have a meltdown in the next year. The thing that is most obvious looking back is that Paulson and Bernanke and Geithner didn't have a clue. Not because they're not smart, but because they were operating in a world that had suddenly changed so radically they didn't know. Right. One of the reasons I've said that the Congress should insist that every decision document from 2008, 2009, and 2010 at the Fed be released, as we are not any better prepared today for a crisis of that scale because the people who were in that crisis and were wrong are still in charge. And I think we need to learn what did they do right and what did they do wrong, precisely for the reason you raised about 2013.
Let me go to housing. What would you do? Would you get the federal government out of housing? Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no need to. Look at
no Freddie Mac, no Fannie Mae, nothing.
That's where the distortions come. That's where the moral hazard comes from. That's where the malinvestment, overbuild. It was predictable. You talked about what economists we should look to, and unfortunately, we've been living with Keynesian economics for many, many decades. And everybody who was right about predicting the bubbles were Austrian economists. They said they were coming. And yet they're also saying, and I agree with them, that everything that we're doing right now is wrong. So what we did with the housing bubble, yes, we had too many houses. It was glaring in our face. The bubble was doomed to burst, and it came because of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, easy credit, and also Community Reinvestment Act. So who got into trouble? The people who did the speculating, the Wall Street, the derivatives market. They got the bailout. They got privileges. So what happened to the middle class? They lost their jobs. They lost their houses. This whole system is all messed up. And what I hear here is just tinkering with the current system and not looking at something new and different. And it's a free market economy without a Federal Reserve System, with sound money. If you don't have that, you're going to continue with the bubble. And this propping up this debt and keeping the correction. You need the correction. You need to get rid of the malinvestment and the debt. The debt is the burden on the economy.
All right, we'll be back. Take a break and be right back. Stay with us from Dartmouth to Hanover, New Hampshire.
Talk about macroeconomics for a minute. Economists measure debt as a percentage of gross domestic product, or GDP. That's the size of our economy. Many economists think a country's debt should be no more than 60% of GDP, and that over 90% is very risky. We're already near 70%, and in less than 30 years, our debt is projected to be 200% of GDP, according to government figures. If 90% is risky, what does 200% mean? It means a bad economy, one with higher interest rates, lower wages, huge tax hikes and spending cuts, higher unemployment, and a falling stock market hurting my 401k. What happened to the America where the next generation is better off? We need to put a plan in place that, once the economy recovers, stabilizes our national debt once and for all.
Clean water for the village, but there are several villages nearby that could use our new system.
Introducing GoToMeeting with HD Faces. Simple, high-definition group video conferencing that will change the way you work. And perhaps a whole lot more. Visit GoToMeeting.com and sign up for your free 30-day trial.
If no one ever challenged the status quo, the Earth would still be flat. Rock would have no role. For decades, Infiniti has challenged what a luxury car should be. We built the world's first high-performance hybrid to achieve 32 mpg, the first around-view monitor. We believe a luxury car should connect you to the road. It should move you emotionally and inspire. Infiniti, inspired performance.
Central banks are flooding the world with cheap money. Interactive Brokers will lend $1 million at just 1.3% for every $200,000 in a portfolio margin account. See our high dividend scanner for the many hundreds of stocks that yield over 5%. Interactive Brokers, stocks, options, futures, forex, bonds worldwide from one account.
Every buy has a sell.
We've got some bulls, we've got some bears. Somewhere in there's a consensus.
And every close has an open.
The closing bell is rung here in the U.S., but trading, of course, has not stopped.
When the market's wrapping up, we're there and getting you ready for tomorrow.
Welcome to Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Lisa Murphy.
I'm Adam Johnson, and this is Street Smart.
All the news you need to be smart on the street.
Now reality sets back in. We're down 240.
The sell-off will continue overnight.
Street Smart with Lisa Murphy and Adam Johnson. Your need to know doesn't stop when the market closes.
In order to take the pulse of America, we have partnered with LinkedIn, and they have some 120 billion network professionals, and we've asked them to take part in this by giving us some polling that they have done. But before I bring some of those results in, I want to take a look at a series of clips we'll show you in this segment, beginning with this one of a former president.
The single most important question facing us tonight is, do we reduce deficits and interest rates by raising revenue from those who are not now paying their fair share? Or do we accept bigger budget deficits, higher interest rates, and higher unemployment simply because we disagree on certain features of a legislative package which offers hope for millions of Americans at home, on the farm, and in the workplace?
Let me go to the governor of Texas. Do you agree with the former president?
Well, I think we're certainly talking about different times, because what I heard him say there, that he was willing to trade tax increases for reductions. I don't think he ever saw those reductions. He just saw the tax increase. Matter of fact, in his diary, he made that statement that he's still looking around for those reductions. So, I mean, from the standpoint, that's one of the problems that we got in Washington, D.C. One of the reasons that I think Americans are so untrustworthy of what's going on in Washington is because they never see a cut in spending. They always hear the siren song of, you know, if you'll allow us to raise taxes, then we'll make these reductions over here. When the fact of the matter is, the issue is we need to have a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. And the next president of the United States needs to spend his time passing a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution.
But I want to stay with this idea of spending cuts and revenue increases, and go back to you, Governor Romney. This is where it is, it seems, in Washington right now. Not only the paralysis, but also you've got the super committees. And if, in fact, they can't find an agreement, we're going to have a trigger with automatic cuts, including defense. So doesn't that demand some kind of compromise, as Reagan suggested?
Well, I don't know which particular compromises he was referring to. We could take a look at that. But I can tell you this. If you go back a few years before that clip and go to JFK's time,